Ladies and gentlemen, when the COVID crisis hit the world, the main central banks were planning wide-ranging reviews of their strategies. The exceptional measures they had adopted to cope with the great financial crisis and its appendixes needed a deeper understanding of their limits and undesired side effects. To gradually define and implement a new normal strategy for the future. The COVID shock has precipitated again the world in exceptional times, requiring the postponement of efforts towards any normality, and the adoption of new extraordinary measures also for monetary policies. However, some of the lessons from the past decade can help to devise the appropriate measures and gradually design a new normality that hopefully will follow the fixing of the COVID damages. I think there are 3 phases to consider. Phase 1 contains the immediate measures required by the shock. Phase 2, the medium-long-term strategy to repair its wounds. Phase 3, the long-run strategic review that central banks will have to resume once the COVID crisis ends and the search for a new normal will make sense again. In phase 1, the task of monetary policy is to provide liquidity to the economy, where combination of supply and demand shocks interrupts cash flows and upsets the payment system. To contain the debts of firms and increases in unemployment, central banks must push commercial banks to lend to households and firms. Besides an appropriate technical framing of the monetary measures, including interest rate incentives for banks, the success of such a vast credit support requires immediate coordination with prudential measures and fiscal policy decisions. On the prudential ground, the crucial aspect is the treatment of bad loans. Forbearance in classifying the quality of loans could cause lasting damages to transparency, while the temporary easing of the relevant capital requirements is inevitable. As for fiscal policy, the government should guarantee a relevant part of the loans and provide liquidity to the open market where security prices are troubled but frightening phases of risk-off. International cooperation in the provision of liquidity is also key. A wide network of swap arrangements centered on the major global currencies should pay special attention to emerging and less developed economies where blockages of global trades, foreign currency denominated debt and sudden capital outflows can cause the economic devastation arriving before the epidemic itself. Insufficient or mistaken action in phase 1 could trigger serious financial crisis that would transform phase 2 in a mayhem. In spite of the measures taken in phase 1, even if a major financial meltdown is avoided, serious wounds will remain in our economies. And phase 2, longer than phase 1, will then be devoted to cure the wounds and relaunch normal growth. Here, monetary and fiscal policy must swap their roles. The latter becomes crucial while monetary policy must assist it without pretending to be able to act alone. Central banks must coordinate with fiscal authorities, providing technical and quantitative support to the financing of their policies, but insistence in relying on monetary expansion to fix the real problems of the system would prove ineffective, unsustainable, dangerous. Among the dangers, one should also include excessive inflation, resulting from the overabundance of money and credit and public deficit coupled with the persistence of negative supply shocks, also coming from the disruption of value chains from trade protectionism and various geopolitical frictions that could limit the elasticity of productions. Resuming multilateral economic coordination under the auspices of the G20 is therefore key also in this respect. Increases in public debt should in part substitute unsustainable private debts, helping firms and households to deleverage and reconstruct the capital stock eaten by the COVID shock and by its consequences. In phase 2, monetary policy must help the placement of new public debt, monitor banks' liquidity, keep the general level of interest rate credibly low, neutralize speculative and distortive shapes in their term structure, as well as excesses of the spreads between interest rates of different countries and debtors. However, the illusion of super low interest rates forever must not be nourished. The size of central bank balance sheet must find a limit, and the excessive flattening of risk premia must be avoided to defend financial market efficiency in allocating resources and financial stability. Eventually, when the end of phase 2 approaches, expectations must be allowed to gradually incorporate the advent of phase 3, when a plan of monetary normalization will start. Looking together to phase 1 and 2, let me stress again 3 points. Monetary and prudential policies must act jointly, and their main preoccupations must be financial stability. Second, financial fragilities must gradually become a dominant theme, and plans to reduce leverages in phase 3 must be timely prepared and pre-announced in the framework of an international coordinated action. International multilateral cooperation must be very active and creative. The role of the G20 is crucial, and the group should intensify its work and increase its ambitions. Time will then come from phase 3. And let me conclude by mentioning 2 main pillars of a new normal to be designed during phase 3. First, like in the preceding 2 phases, central banks must move beyond the idea that monetary policy should focus squarely on inflation, and financial stability is a task better left to prudential regulation. The G20 should, I think, adopt the following statement, which in fact was written in a document by the IMF after the great financial crisis. The sentence would say, the mandate of monetary policy should include macro-financial stability, not just price stability. The second pillar of phase 3 is the deleveraging of the global economy, burdened with debts in the preceding 2 phases. Gradual increases in interest rates will have to be targeted. Prudential regulation should increase the maximum unweighted leverage of banks, imposing also limits to the leverage of firms that borrow from them. Coherent fiscal measures should be decided to gradually reduce public debt, and a long-due reform should invert tax incentives of debt versus equity financing. Invert tax incentives of debt versus deficit equity financing. This is something we have to work on very quickly. It's very, very important. Dangerous stressing periods during this complex deleveraging phase should be carefully monitored and assisted by jointly easing liquidity conditions and prudential constraints. Well, thank you for your attention.